carrying something that stopped every person holding a camera in that moment. The bandaging was not subtle. It was not the careful, minimal wrapping of a player managing a minor inconvenience. It was heavy. Pronounced. The kind of bandaging that communicates, without any accompanying words, that something significant had happened inside that hospital and that the process of undoing it was going to take time. His wife, Mamiko, walked beside him. Close. Not ceremonially close. The closeness of someone who had been inside that building with him and was not ready to let the distance between them increase even by a step. The medical staff flanked them on both sides. Nobody smiled for the cameras. The attire was the first thing people noticed. Not the bandaging, which came a moment later as he turned and the light caught it fully. The attire first. Because Ohtani, in every public appearance that the sports world has catalogued across his years in America, has presented himself with a particular kind of considered neatness. The clothes of a man who understands that his image is always being read and who has decided, with characteristic deliberateness, to give that reading as little as possible to work with. What he wore leaving the hospital was not that. It was loose. Functional. The clothing of someone for whom comfort had become the only relevant variable and appearances had temporarily stopped mattering. A thick jacket despite the morning temperature. Sweatpants that had no relationship to fashion. Shoes that looked chosen in under 10 seconds. For the people who study Ohtani, and there are many, across 2 continents, who study him with an attention that would be remarkable if its object were anyone other than him, the clothing communicated something that the medical briefings had not quite managed to convey. It communicated how he felt. Not how the injury was progressing. Not what the timeline projected. How he, Shohei Ohtani, physically felt in his body on the morning he was discharged from the hospital. The answer written in the loose jacket and the sweatpants and the shoes chosen in under 10 seconds was not reassuring. But it was his face that became the real conversation. Photographs circulate differently in the age of social media. They do not stay in one place. They move across platforms and borders and language barriers with a speed that makes the world feel, in those moments, genuinely small. Within an hour of the side door opening, the images of Ohtani's face were being examined in Los Angeles and Tokyo and Seoul and Sao Paulo by people who had been waiting since the hospitalization announcement to see something that the official statements could not provide. They wanted to see how he looked. And what they saw produced a specific, uncomfortable reaction across every platform and every language. He looked tired in a way that was deeper than sleep deprivation. He looked like a man carrying a weight that had not been there before. Not defeated. That word would be wrong, and the people who know him even slightly, through years of watching him compete in impossible moments, would reject it immediately. But altered. As if the days inside that hospital had shifted something that would need time to shift back. His eyes, which in game situations carry a quality of focus so complete that television cameras have learned to return to them repeatedly because they communicate something that statistics cannot, were quieter than anyone had seen them. Not empty. But quieter. Mamiko did not look at the cameras once. She looked only at him. The private vehicle was already waiting. Black. Tinted windows. Positioned so that the distance between the door and the car required less than 15 steps. Someone had measured that distance. Someone had thought carefully about minimizing the time between the shelter of the hospital and the shelter of the vehicle, about controlling the environment around him for those 15 steps in a way that was impossible to control inside the building. He made those 15 steps slowly. The medical staff moved with him. One on each side. Not holding him. But close enough that holding him would have required no adjustment, no reaction time, no gap between the need and the response. He reached the car. He lowered himself into the seat with a care that communicated exactly what the heavy bandaging had already suggested. Mamiko followed. The door closed. The cameras kept running for another 40 minutes, pointing at a car that wasn't going to open again. Then the document arrived. 15 pages. A medical record that had not been intended for public circulation but that found its way, through the specific channels that sensitive documents sometimes find in the age of digital everything, into the hands of reporters who understood immediately what they were holding. 15 pages is not a routine discharge summary. A routine discharge summary is 2 pages. 3. If the attending physician is thorough. 15 pages is a document that has been built over time, that has accumulated findings and consultations and imaging results and second opinions and the careful, dated notations of medical professionals who understood they were managing something that could not afford to be managed carelessly. The reporters who received it spent several hours with it before publishing anything. Not because they were being cautious about Ohtani's privacy, though some of them were, but because the document required time. It required the kind of reading that moves slowly and then returns to certain passages and reads them again. What the 15 pages revealed was not a single cause. That was the first thing that complicated the simple narrative that the public had been constructing since the initial injury announcement. The root cause, as the document described it, was not the event that had prompted the hospitalization. The event that prompted the hospitalization was a consequence. A visible expression of something that had been developing for longer than anyone outside the medical staff had known. The imaging, the blood work, the physical assessments conducted across the days of his hospital stay had traced a line backward through time to a point of origin that predated the symptoms that had first raised the alarm. The knee finding that the Dodgers GM had mentioned carefully, in the measured language of an organization trying not to generate more uncertainty than necessary, was not incidental. The 15-page document positioned it differently. Not as a secondary discovery. As a contributing factor. As one piece of a physical picture that had more complexity than the early public statements had suggested. The inflammation that had shut down his pitching was connected. Not simply coincidentally present in the same body at the same time. Connected in the way that the human body, which does not organize itself according to the clean categorical separations that medical briefings prefer, connects things that are under sustained, extraordinary stress. Ohtani had been pitching and hitting at the highest level of professional baseball simultaneously. He had done it while recovering from Tommy John surgery. He had done it while managing the physical demands of a Dodgers season that had carried playoff pressure from the first week. He had done it with the particular intensity of someone who does not have a lower setting, who does not know how to prepare at less than full capacity, who has built his entire professional identity around the refusal to accept limitation. The 15 pages described what that refusal had quietly cost. In Japan, the document's contents moved through the sports media with the speed of something that people had been half expecting and half dreading for years. The conversation it generated was not celebratory. There was no satisfaction in being right about the risk. There was only the sober reckoning of people who love him and who had watched the accumulation of demands on his body with the specific anxiety of those who understand, from their own baseball tradition, that the body keeps its own accounting. A former Japanese national team physician, speaking on a sports broadcast, chose his words with extreme care. He did not criticize the Dodgers medical staff. He did not suggest negligence or mismanagement. He said the 15-page document was the record of a body being asked to do something that no body had been asked to do before, and that the absence of a historical precedent meant the absence of a warning system. You cannot set an alarm for a failure mode that has never previously been observed. He paused before his final sentence. He said Ohtani would recover. He said the findings, serious as they were manageable. He said the most important thing now was the thing that Dr. Ella Trash had already said and that the Dodgers had already committed to. Do not force him. Mamiko had not spoken to the media. She had not issued a statement. She had not appeared at any of the press conferences or briefings or carefully managed information releases of the past several days. She had simply been present. In the hospital. In the corridor. In the 15 steps between the side door and the car. But her presence communicated something that the 15 pages and the press conferences and the careful organizational language had not managed to convey with the same clarity.